Unplugged. Ooh, Thunderfoot Unplugged. Finally, without the production quality, without any production values whatsoever. Let's do a review of this. Let's see. See if this will play properly. Oh, that's right. That won't work. Clicking in the wrong place.
So, this is probably really quite ill-advised, but, you know, having a drink, celebratory drink, and sit down and a little chat. And...
No, it's a great idea. It's not a wrong idea at all. Good for you, Thunderfoot. Go.
It sort of goes to... Yeah, recently I brought up that my dad was dying of cancer. Obviously a fairly traumatic thing, impacts me greatly.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I did not notice that. I don't see all your videos. I missed that video. But yeah, that sucks. Sorry to hear that.
And I knew that when I did that this was essentially putting it into the public domain, and that there would be all of the bottom feeders who just use this as a cheap way to get it.
I have to admit, I wonder who he's talking about. Who would use such a thing? Maybe he'll tell us.
And boy, did they not disappoint. And yes, 100%. The social justice warrior community, the people claiming the high moral ground, are the same people who are happy to use my dad dying of cancer as a cheap point scoring exercise.
See, the thing is that these people that are claiming to be social justice warrior community people, they're claiming to be like me, to actually care about social justice, and yet you're seeming to say that they don't actually care about that. Because I certainly would not do that. That's terrible. Use your father's unfortunate illnesses against you. That's despicable. That's totally despicable. There's no other way to express it. I wonder who would have done that.
It's like, for fuck's sake, even Westboro Baptist Church, right? The most lowest scum of the lot.
I guess it's Anita Sarkeesian, Hannibal Barca, people like that. And I'm to understand that they are worse than the, Fred Phelps, Westboro Baptist Church attitude that Thunderfoot himself went and interviewed, by the way. It was an interesting interview, worth searching.
They at least wait until people have died before they're jerky to the relatives. Right? In this case, no, they didn't even wait that long. Anyway, so...
That sucks. I'm not being sarcastic or anything either. I mean, I think if somebody used his dying dad against him, I disapprove of that.
Yeah, the social justice warrior community, they were all over this as some sort of cheap point scoring exercise. And these are the people claiming the high moral ground. That, oh no, how terrible it is that people get harassed on the internet. And these are the people who are willing to use, for fuck's sake, someone's father dying of cancer.
I think I can, in my own case, clearly say that I do not claim a high moral ground and then trash people in a way that I say I'm better than, right? That sounds like what he's accusing these people of. And it could be true. I mean, I've been on the internet long enough to know that this is often how people act.
And so, as a way to get at people. Anyway, so why am I having a drink to celebrate today? Well, turns out that he's been in hospital for the last couple of weeks with suspected liver failure. Scans, nothing really quite gelled with that, but that's their working assumption. And so today they put a tube in a stent to see if they can unclog one of his bile ducts. And that seems to work, which means that it's not liver failure. On the grand scheme of things, though, it is still very much celebrating when your house is burned down, but your photo albums have survived.
Yeah. I know what he means there.
It's just a hell of a lot better than it could be, which is why I don't drink. So,
yeah.
Cheers, Dad.
Yeah. Good luck.
But the one thing that I did take pleasure, and I mean real pleasure, was watching these bastards who were happy to do what they did.
I don't really know what they did.
Some social justice warrior community, and they have all that viciousness which was directed at me. They're now directed on each other. And
see, I guess what I'm thinking is that this community he's talking about of people that are social justice warriors that are fake, he pays attention to them, but he doesn't pay attention to anybody that could be called a warrior for social justice that actually works on that, as if there are no such things, as if all social, I mean, I've been arguing with people and some of them acknowledge that, hey, some people do work for social justice, but they don't, mostly I've been hearing how, no, you're the same. You don't really, the only reason to pretend that that to say that you're interested in such things is to pretend and thereby exploit. And, I've had people call me, people claim that I called them Nazis. And I didn't mention Nazis or fascism or anything like that. And yet they're so sensitive, they think they've been called these names.
I've got to admit, I took a certain guilty pleasure in watching that. And there were people who actually say to me, look, why do you even bother with these losers? Why don't you just ignore them? They're nothing.
Schadenfreude or Schadenfreude. Yeah.
And the simple answer is no. These people are a plague, and they're a plague on academia. And if you don't believe me, right? So this was, what was that? This is the University of California Office of the President. It's a tool for recognizing microaggressions and the messages that they send. Right? There's a whole list of.
That's where my philosophy degree is from, and I studied physics and math as well.
These things. And this is University of California, right? This is not some sort of small ass chump change thing. This is places like Berkeley, right?
Okay, so Berkeley, this is the place that I happen, just by coincidence, to have gotten my philosophy degree and to have worked my way through school, working for NASA Ames Research Center, which is also in the Bay Area, and then subsequently the University of California Astronomy Department. So he's talking about my alma mater here, just,
And this is one of the ones that got up here. Myth of meritocracy. The statement which asserts that does not play a role in success is the issue of faculty demographics. So, and this is exactly what it says. This, according to them, is a micro.
Talking about right? So like in an almost still, let's say a stagnant pond that is still nevertheless circulating slowly, we might say the micro forces. But what about if that pond did have an outlet that went into a little tiny waterfall? That would also have micro forces involved, right? So you're talking, when you say micro forces, a high granularity, a spatial resolution, where each voxel in this resolution has a force vector associated with it. When you're talking about micro, you're using that as energy to talk about the fact that by calling it a microaggression, each little incidence is subminimal. It right, micro means it's not just minimal, it's subminimal. It's on the threshold of being negligible, except for when you apply calculus and add up the curve, which is made of all these micro or nano aggressions. You might have some volume under the curve of net aggression doled out in these little micro increments. And it's using this analogy to what they think the situation is. And, I think, Thunderfoot, you might disagree with what the situation is, but it's not exactly difficult to understand what they're claiming, I don't think.
It's also tantamount to racism. Is I believe the most qualified person should get the job, or of course he'll get tenure even though he hasn't published much. He's black. Men and women have equal opportunities for achievement. Gender plays a role in who we hire, which is of course bollock. There was this recent study that showed that women have a 2-to-1 advantage in faculty appointments. Anyway, right, so statements like, I believe the most qualified person should get the job, is sending the message that people of color are given extra unfair benefits because of their race. The level playing.
Now that's interesting to me, really. 2-to-1, because the absolute number of faculty is definitely not 2-to-1 in favor of women. Maybe they're just catching up. I mean, maybe when it becomes even, we could consider whatever the rate of acceptance is as the indicator. As a scientist, Thunderfoot, I think you might see what I'm saying. It might be 2-to-1 you claim, but maybe it's just catching up to being 50-50, because it's not 50-50 in the current numbers now. Is it? I don't think so. Now, should it be? Yeah, I really think it probably should be. I think faculty appointments, there's a reason to expect that they would have a stochastic distribution when it came to race and gender. That's just what I think, and I believe it so strongly that it's something that I expect and would like to measure against. Just the way it is. Not the only one, obviously.
Is so even that women cannot make it. The problem is with them. People of color are lazy, incompetent, and need to work harder. It's like, how the fuck do you get that from, I believe the most qualified person should get the job? Right? This is not some Mickey Mouse organization. This covers things like the university. This covers things like Berkeley, one of the most top-rated universities in the world. And they also had this thing recently about this. They're a Nobel laureate,
which is where I went to school, by the way.
Something or other Hunt, and. Yeah, he made some statement. The men and women should work together because they fall in love. Some wishy-washy shit like that. That they fall in love, or you fall in love with them, or they cry when you criticize them. It was something like that. And given the choice between that and something like saying that I believe the most qualified person should get the job is a microaggression that should be weeded out of academia. Give me the sexist firebrand any day.
Well, you know what? I actually agree that that's a funny statement to argue against, but I think as an intellectual with a subtle, it's not impossible to understand the sentiment expressed. It's it can be interpreted as saying that when you say the most qualified person, well, let me tell you what I think. I've hired many people, and the whole idea that the most qualified person, I mean, what? From an interview, a series of interviews of different people is a series of first impressions. What's the quality of a statistical sample of one meeting? Thunderfoot, it's low, right? A statistical sample of your first impression, automatically low. So maybe you do an in-phone meeting, maybe then you do an in-person meeting. I mean, even if it's 3 or 4 meetings, that 5 or 6 meetings, that's a long interview process. You're improved over one meeting quite a bit, but you still barely could be considered to have a statistical sample of interactions with this individual, right? So what does the best qualified mean exactly then? When you obviously don't have a sample of data to objectively evaluate who's the best qualified. And when you take into account your psychological biases, it's very difficult to say that, a person that's just slightly, even 2% inclined to think women are just not as likely to be diligent, what the impact of that is when the candidates for the job and they're the judge, the subjective judge of what is most qualified, right? So is there a meter of what's most qualified, what someone thinks the most qualified should be, but then they have, well, you think the most qualified person should be hired, and how exactly is that to be determined objectively, since it can't be determined objectively? And when you know there's biases in the historical and current in society, why would you ignore those when you know there's biases that skew people's idea of who might be their guess of most qualified? How do you just ignore that's a significant influence there, what their daddy and mom and granddad and great granddad taught them to expect from people of certain characteristics, colors, genders, etc., professions.
Right? Because what academia is about is about pushing the boundaries, right, of the unknown. Right? You have to be able to stand up and challenge stuff. You have to be able to have that freedom. Right? In this case, I think he's wrong. Right? There really isn't that much of a problem with falling in love with people in the lab, but he should have the right to say it. And believe me, the guy has earned his chops. Once you've got a Nobel Prize, to sort of say, well, yeah, but he's some sort of no talent loser, isn't going to hold water. The guy has obviously got some talent behind him, right? Doesn't mean he can't be wrong. We can all be wrong, right? But to actually give me achievers, give me people who can win a Nobel Prize over, I mean, for fuck's sake, the University of California officer as the president. I believe the most qualified person should get the job is a microaggression that's discriminating against black people and women. Which is why I actually do this stuff on feminism.
So to explain that to you, it's not that the statement is not literally defensible. It's that when people use that particular statement, what they're really saying is The fact that there's more white males in faculty is just because they're more qualified. And he's saying, no, it's a microaggression that seems to not, but in fact characterizes the whole continuum of nanosecond by nanosecond micro bias, because you're taking a nanosecond or a microsecond, it's a micro scale, so the bias can be measured over the instantaneous or near instantaneous, microsecond or nanosecond scale. That's what's being said. It's not incomprehensible.
It's this stuff is it's a plague, and
I think your apathy to the clearly actionable situations in the world, in which you think it is more actionable to talk about someone who's talking about fucking video games than to just say, well, that's not the best feminist motion. Here's the best feminist motion. I will talk about what we should do in Saudi Arabia. Instead of ignoring her as insufficient about what should happen in gender issues, you could bring up your own fucking idea of what ought to happen, what the most important thing is. Instead, you don't bring up anything we ought to fucking do, and you stop the people that are doing somewhat, maybe, relatively pointless compared to what the Gandhis of the world have decided to do. But how in the hell are you helping to promote the future Gandhis and Martin Luther Kings of the world? Not at all. You're not helping to promote them. You're just using Anita Sarkeesian as an archetype of why the rest of us that are interested in social fucking justice are, not worthwhile or should be ignored or laughable or blah, 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 big screen on your computer.
Sooner or later, there is going to have to be an organized pushback against it. And that's going to have to come from people who actually make some sensible argument. They've had years of this, where they've had their women's studies.
Right. It's going to have to come from people that have sensible arguments. And you, what? Are you seeking that out? Are you looking at the thousands to tens of thousands of people you could be looking at on YouTube? Are you trying to seek out the reasonable ones? Because it looks to me like you try to seek out the unreasonable ones and cast aspersions on a whole category that, if listened to sincerely, would include the reasonable ones, just, under the rug, swept under the rug with the rest of them.
Well, now that gender studies and, people have sort of left it alone. That
yeah, gender isn't a real thing. It can't be studied, right? Because gender, quote unquote, quotes in the air. Gender is a real thing, Thunderfoot. Therefore, it could be studied, right? You could complain about how an individual studies that subject, but when you quote around the subject itself, you show that you have no respect for the subject, regardless of if some person investigates that subject in an invalid way. You just are saying, like, there is no valid way to look at it. It's not a real enough thing. Or is that not what you mean? Maybe you should be more clear with your air quotes.
And get off with their speculative bullshit, because it didn't really interfere with anyone, right? But now it is, and it's going to be approved. If there is no pushback, it's going to spread. I mean, it's already in places like Berkeley, right? So, and for me,
yeah, how dare they? Like bigotries, that's not a real phenomenon. The world hasn't really experienced that. Why would you look at the fucking effects of bigotries and various kinds of bigotries in the world. Like, it doesn't really exist, I guess. Right? It's not a real phenomena. You know, maybe it's a fucking recipe of phenomena, but we see the overall thing that we call bigotries, and there's all kinds of bigotries, and guess what, Thunderfoot? They're fucking real. And to study a real thing is an academic pursuit. And it might not be just, you know, looking at the next molecule in the series of, you know, predicted molecules that have sugar and salt at the same time or whatever. But it's just as academic. And, you know, it might not be as material of a science as biology, which itself might not be as material a science as chemistry, which itself might not be as material a science as physics, which ultimately is an abstract science, ironically. But it is a pursuit that you would want to look into. There is bigotry in the world. We know that. Non-controversial. Don't controverse it. Therefore, we're going to look into how it works. And if we look at micro bigotries, that's nothing different than Isaac Newton using calculus to look at force in a, you know, atomic contributory way, where you split things into little tiny slices that are, you know, smooth and high granularity. Oh, you don't understand that concept as a scientist? Well, you ought to. Maybe it's because you're a biologist.
If you like, academia is one of these places where you really can't tolerate this sort of, yeah, but my feelings are more important than what's correct. Right? If you can demonstrate it.
Study a bigotry, finding bigotry into high granularity and discussing micro moments, or whatever you would want to call. How? You would have to deny there is a phenomena of bigotry to say that there's no scientific way to divide that into a calculus of infinitesimals and try and increase the granularity and possibly explain where no 5 second or the 100 hours might get it anyway in the summation. How is that fucking non-academic, non-scientific even? It isn't.
It really doesn't matter. And to take the most firebrand example, if you can demonstrate that race is actually a significant factor in achievement, in some cases that's not terribly difficult. And if you take a look at, say, all of the fastest long-distance runners in the world, it's something like 9 out of 10 or 6 out of 10. Some huge fraction of the world's long-distance runners are Kenyans. Now, are you saying, and it's not just from Kenya, it's from some tiny plateau area in Kenya, right? There clearly are aspects to this. The thing that pisses me off about this is it gets sucked into people want to know, yeah, but are they genetically inferior, yada, yada, yada. And do these people not understand some of the most basic aspects about civilization? Spock had something on these lines, the needs of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. What it basically means is that people in groups are more effective than individuals working on their own. The whole is greater than the sum of its components. And that's one of the biggest, in military terms, it would be called a force amplifier. It's one of the biggest force amplifiers out there, right? To the point where, let's just take a random example. That there's a bunch of super intelligent blue people, right? But the blue people can only work as individuals.
Well, I went downstairs to eat a little ribs, but I had this playing out loud, so I could still hear it. I would like to point out that, as an aside, not the Thunderfoot, but as a part of other concepts I've been describing recently, that the hierarchy, the idea of a command and control hierarchy, that you have to have a boss and he's got his lieutenants or his committee of lieutenants and or vice presidents, and they have their reports, and this spanning out of the org chart is the problem with it is that the whole model is that, you know, the buck stops at the top. Like the top guy, the CEO, the chief executive officer, is sort of represents the whole organization as an individual. Supposedly he's made all the decisions or somehow delegated it such that he would be responsible. Of course, when the shit really hits the fan in the real world, we see underlings blamed, not the CEO, but theoretically, the buck should stop there. Now, I'm not so concerned with the corruption that the buck doesn't really stop there. I accept that it might be an underling's fault. I don't think that the command and control really flows to the top, and that what we to have this thing of many minds is more productive than one. You have to have a more distributed architecture, right? Like a network architecture, and it has to be more distributed than we're accustomed to, for this effect, this multiplying effect that Thunderfoot is praising to apply. And I also would praise it. I think it is true. I discovered this as an individualist. I realized, oh my God, but as an individual, I'm not going to go to the moon. But look what 1,000 people or 500 or whatever it was, people could do if they all tried to work together to get to the moon. They could send one of the 500 or whatever to the moon. That's, impressive. We should pay attention to how that's possible.
The fact that they're all super intelligent makes almost no difference because they all work alone. Whereas we, a bunch of mediocre apes, because we work together, we can do things like put men on the moon, something that the super intelligent blue people will never do. And that's one of the things that bugs me about these people who look for, tiny differences in IQs, in race, and all that sort of thing, is you're really looking in the wrong place, because
See, here's where Thunderfoot is progressive, and I just agree with him. It is annoying. He's making a good point here. I see where he's going. Let's let him go. Let him go. Go, Thunderfoot.
IQ is
unplugged.
Not a great amplifier like that. What you really want to be looking for is things which are big amplifiers, which is, for the large part, is the ability to make societies. Anyway, so but anyway, if you wanted the freedom to actually make such arguments, you should be able to do it within academia. You shouldn't be. That's the whole reason why they gave people tenure in the first place, is that you wouldn't be limited by this sort of thing. Anyway, I think I've rambled enough. So, yeah. Do a good day.
Cheers.